Joining us right now is our own winner. It's upside down, Ricky.
Actually, that's the way it was published.
Yeah. Our own winner. He does a tremendous job covering the Eagles for ESPN.com at 97.5 The Fanatic. Mr. Tim McManus on the Comcast Business Hotline. How you doing today, Tim?
I'm doing good, Ty. Thawing out. Just got off the practice field, and it's cold.
Yeah, it's cold out there, and I don't care what the Rams say. If you're used to playing indoors in that little kind of cushy environment, you might be able to play in it, but you're not looking forward to coming to play in that crap. All right, you wrote a great story that people should definitely go to ESPN.com and read. Nick Sirianni is a player's coach, no matter what you think of him. And I have to admit, you know, obviously, Tim, we've had a lot of conversations about Nick Sirianni's approach and some of the things he needs to improve upon from last year going into this year. Could you talk about some of the great nuggets that you have in your story about Nick Sirianni?
Yeah, sure. So, there's a lot that goes into a head coaching job, and we've debated the different angles of what Sirianni is good at and where he needs improvement. But one area of focus and one thing that he's been pretty good at over the course of his time here has been connecting with players. And so I just sort of dove into that because there's a little bit of a difference between some public perception versus the way that the locker room feels about him. And so I kind of wanted to figure that out as to why they grabbed his back as much as they did. And a lot of it just really comes down to sort of personal connection, whether it's with Jordan Mailata and his father, who was going through some serious health issues that Sirianni really took the time to make sure that Mailata had a safe space to open up about. There's just so many different stories, like everybody seemed to have their own. I just basically went through the locker room and was like, what's your story with Nick? And people would open up about, these personal connections that they had with him. So I don't think there's any question that he's thriving in that area of his job, and that's led to further connection between player and coach, and then player to player, which has helped cultivate what seems like a pretty good culture this year.
Does this all come into play? He became the CEO coach. If you remember, he brought this up that he wants to keep in touch with the players at all costs early on. And does this just all kind of fall into his job description now?
Yeah, I would say one of the takeaways from last season, Ricky, was that the culture wasn't up to standard for them. It was really good in 2022. Last year it fell off, just a tense building, kind of just like a down building, like even after wins. And players and coaches alike will tell you that, it didn't have that same connectivity that they had felt a year ago. And so that was, part of the mission from the organization as a whole, and Sirianni in particular, to make sure that was at a better level. And so they've invested a whole lot of time into that. And that's something that's like kind of hard to measure. Like when you're talking about statistics and things that happen on the field, I mean, you have data. But when it comes to like chemistry of a team, that's something that's sort of hard to define. But they've put a ton of energy into that. And Sirianni specifically, because he's seated, or it was taken from him, however you want to put it, with the offensive control, he focused more time onto an area that he thought was lacking, and that was the connectivity, and obviously has done a pretty good job with it.
Tim, looking now ahead to the Rams game, obviously not a great performance offensively against the Packers. At the same time, I felt like at times they were being maybe extra vanilla because they didn't really think the Packers were going to do a lot. Do you think that it's obviously it can be concerning, but do you think people should panic about the offensive play and think that they can't improve off of what they saw on Sunday?
So it's really the passing game for me, and it hasn't had the level of consistency that, number one, it should given the talent, and number two, to an area where people are going to feel super confident about it. I agree with you that last week felt very intentional from that perspective. The Eagles were conservative on offense, man. I mean, there's just no other way to put it. If you think about the third and longs where they're just running the ball or throwing screens, it was pretty clear that they felt that the defense was handling their business and the offense just had to sort of do enough and not turn the ball over. But this is a pattern that we've seen that really dates back to the bye week. And I looked at the numbers today. So through weeks 1 through 4, when they were obviously 2-2 and sort of struggling out of the gate, they were -6 in turnover margin. which was 31st in the NFL. Then they had the bye week. As we know, they dedicated towards the ground game. Hurts got more conservative as a passer. And since week 6 on, they are plus 17 in turnover margin, and that's number 1 in the NFL, tied with the Buffalo Bills. So they went from second to last to first, and it's been intentional. The question is, can they turn it on when they need to? Can they put, if the game needs to go on the passing game's back, can Jalen Hurts and the rest of the guys rev it up? And honestly, that remains the biggest question for a team that looks championship caliber. And, until they do it in a big spot, maybe it comes against the Rams this week. Maybe it's the Lions in the championship game. Maybe it's the Bills in the Super Bowl, whoever it is. But there is going to come that moment this season.
Yeah, I think one position, obviously the defense has been a big key this season, and losing to Kobe Dean is not the greatest thing in the world at this point in the year. How do they fill in there?
Well, I feel like Fangio was pretty forthcoming yesterday. Oren Burks obviously got the call when the Kobe Dean went out against the Packers. And going back and watching the film, he struggled. And it was evident that the Packers decided to start attacking him. And Josh Jacobs, whether it was from Texas routes or if it was just pure ground game, they were finding ways to get him in stress. And yet there was missed tackles and there were some chunk plays. And it was a pretty clear difference between Dean versus Burke. So, Fangio gets asked about it and about the opportunity, maybe Jeremiah Trotter Jr. getting in there. And he said, well, he's got a good future, and that future may be now. So I think that Trotter is going to be in there at least in a rotational basis. And that I think that does reflect in part, yes, the special teams facet of it. Burks was awesome. He had the game-changing, tone-setting hit right out of the chute against the Packers, but also because, he wasn't great in replacement. So I think you're going to see some Trotter, but I fully expect that there's going to be some drop-off, and that Sean McVay, being as good of a schemer as he is going to try to exploit the middle of that defense. And they've been very fortunate, Ricky, without, they didn't have many injuries this year, and now they're dealing with a significant one. You're talking about the defensive play caller, the guy with the green dot who's communicating and get that defense set, and now that's going to fall to Zach Vaughn, who's going to be without his running partner. So that's a significant development. The defense is not going to be better for it. It's just a matter of, can Fangio find ways to scheme it up on his end where they don't get exposed too bad?
We're speaking with Tim McManus. He does a tremendous job covering the Eagles for ESPN.com and 97.5 The Fanatic. Working off of that, though, you talk about tone setting. Tim, you've been here your whole life, Philadelphia. Could you imagine what happens in the link, though, if early in the game Stafford drops back and there's a blitz and Trotter Jr. gets a sack or gets an interception? Could you imagine how loud the crowd would be if that was to happen, only because we all know the history with his dad?
Yeah, and this city knows the history as well as anybody about their football team, and Trotter, obviously, Sr. is an icon. And there was a lot of jubilation for a later-round pick when Trotter Jr. was drafted. And so there's, even when Fangio had those quotes yesterday, the reaction on social media, people were like, let's go. Get Trot Jr. in there. So, yeah, I mean, and look, we understand that he's got a lot of ability. He's been taught very well from a young age from his father. He's got great instincts. And, yes, if he can come in there and make a big impact play, that place will go crazy.
Is this going to be another Barkley game? I mean, do you take this going in thinking he had 255 in the first game? Let's see early on if they're even going to think about stopping him.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and you have to give credit to Chris Shula, the defensive coordinator of the Rams, for improving really since that Eagles game in Week 12 on. And if you look at the last handful of games, they've been giving up just single digits and have really, impressed, including in that wild card game against Minnesota. Granted, Sam Darnold was not good, but still, it was a pretty impressive performance. And the defensive line, as we know, for the Rams is young, and it's talented, and it's something that the Eagles are going to have to be wary of, especially when they get into pass situations. Jalen Hurts has been holding on to the ball just like Darnold has, and you worry about that if you're an Eagles fan. But the defensive line can't suddenly get bigger. You know what I mean? Like the offensive line for the Eagles dominated them physically, and part of it's just kind of like sheer size and force. And I don't know how Shula or anybody else is going to be able to change that in a handful of weeks' time. So, yeah, if I'm the Eagles, I'm going right back to it. I'm not expecting 255 out of Barkley, but you see that the physical domination is possible, and that you have arguably the best back in the league that can find a hole and exploit it and break off some chunk runs. So, yeah, I think that you go back to Barkley and make the Rams prove that they've fixed it before you go away from it.
Well, let me tell you, Tim, tremendous job as usual. Everyone should read. Eagle Sirianni is a player's coach no matter what you think of him. I'm not just saying that because you're on the air. I read that this morning. I had to stop all my prep and read this whole thing. I couldn't skim it. It was so good. So everybody should definitely check out your great work. And obviously, hopefully, we'll be talking about another football game next week and not doing a season wrap. Appreciate you.
All right. I appreciate you. Thanks for taking the time to read that, Ty, and for the support as always. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks so much, Tim. That was Tim McManus on the Comcast Business Hotline. Just a tremendous job covering the Eagles for ESPN.com and 97.5 The Fanatic. No, it was really good. It gets quotes from about a bunch of different. I mean, from the long snapper to Mailata to Lane Johnson to the Kobe Dean. Like, it has quotes from Milton Williams. Like,
that's pretty cool.
He talked to a lot of guys about
he was like, I'm going to make sure I'm getting this in full, not just a half-assed job. That's excellent.
Yeah, BG, AJ, like a lot of stuff. Like, he got quotes from a lot of people.
Hey, everybody, thanks for watching our YouTube. If you want to help us out, go ahead and like and subscribe for us. If you liked what you saw, go right over here to our playlists and pick out whatever you want to watch.